As a brand new real estate investor, you might be asking yourself, should you invest in single family real estate or multifamily real estate? Shoot, I guess even if you are an experienced investor in one asset class or the other, you may be asking yourself, should you diversify and invest in other asset classes? So in this video, I want to talk about single family real estate investing and multifamily real estate investing, and I want to talk about the pros of each so you can kind of know ahead of time which one suits what you want to do or maybe meet your goals better than the other one. I own 6 apartment complexes and about 140 single family rental properties. So I have a pretty good amount of experience in both, so I feel like I can really give you some inside information and some tips and some tricks that will actually help you make the decision because I'm actively investing in both. This is not something I've done in the past. This is not something I've done once or twice. I've done both of these a lot. I've screwed up a lot and I've done some pretty cool things. So now I want to show you what I've learned so you can make an informed decision on where you want to invest. Single family is a single family residence, and for the most part, it means 1 to 4 units. So when I say single family, I mean a duplex, a triplex, or a fourplex. But for this, I'm mainly going to be talking about single family residential 1-person living houses. But when I say multifamily, I mean 5 units or more. A lot of people will call a duplex or a triplex or a quadplex a multifamily. And I guess technically that's right because more than one family can live in it. But when you're in the real estate investing space, and especially the banking space that funds real estate investing, multifamily is 5 units or more because their value difference, banks fund them difference, there's different funding sources for them. So for this video, single family, pretty much talk about a house, but up to 4 units, multifamily, 5 units or more. All right, let's start out with single family investing and the pros. One of the biggest pros of single family investing is the liquidity. Liquidity basically means the ease of transaction, meaning you can get cash out of single family properties extremely quickly by selling, doing a cash out refinance, or even a home equity line of credit. It's extremely easy to sell single family rental properties, much easier than multifamily properties. Of course, people want to buy multis and there's a ton of buyers for them, but obviously there's a lot more demand for single family houses and there's a lot more people that are willing to buy single family houses. You can have investors, hedge funds, hopefully a family in your area that you're providing the house to by either renting it or selling it. Preferably that's the route you would go, but there are a lot of buyers for single family houses, so you can get your money out quickly, your equity out quickly. That's a huge pro. And then also, like I said, a cash out refinance is very easy to do on a single family property as well as a home equity line of credit. So cash and liquidity are very, very easy to get with single families. The second pro I want to talk about kind of pertains more to owning a single family rental property, and that is the tenant bases of single family rental properties tend to be a little bit easier to deal with than multifamilies. Now that's not always the case. Of course, there's amazing tenant bases in both asset classes, and there's really nice luxury apartments that have amazing tenants, and then there's, you know, some decent houses that have horrible tenants. I'm not saying that one is vastly different than the other, but through my experience and most real estate investors that I know, somebody that wants to live in a single family house usually potentially has, you know, some kids, a little more established in their career, money's a little bit easier for them, they're willing to take care of the property, mow the grass, do all those things, so they have a little bit of pride in, you know, being a tenant. When it comes to multifamily, you get a lot of that too, but it's usually maybe single people or people that, you know, aren't as established in their career, don't want to mess with, you know, mowing the grass and upkeeping it. They just want somebody else to do that, so they just kind of want to live somewhere. When it comes to single families, it's more like they're treating it as a home. That's kind of how I look at it. Somebody that's going to treat somewhere they live as a home is somebody you want living there, is going to take care of it, and somebody that is looking at it as like maybe an extended hotel stay is not going to have as much pride in their stay, because no matter what asset class I own, whether it be single family, multifamily, or self-storage, I have pride in ownership and I take care of it. I'm not a slumlord. I am a landlord that cares about their tenants.
Can I be in it?
You're in it. We'll make sure you're in it. That's my mom. Say hi, Mom.
Hello.
The final pro of single families before I get into some of the cons and then multifamily is you can ride a really hot market. If the market is going crazy like it did from 2020 to 2022, or maybe like 04 to 07, you cannot really do anything but maintain your property that the tenant's in, that they're paying you to maintain, and that property and that asset can go up in value a ton. A single family house in the bottom of 2010, 2011, you know, the national average house was in the low 200s. And just 10, 12 years later now, the national average is in the upper 400s. So the property's literally over doubled in value just by riding the low of 2010 up to the height of 2022. So you can ride that hot market. Now, there are some cons that come with that if the market's not hot, I'll talk about, but just timing it right and holding on to assets, you can get a lot of equity and a lot of wealth quickly by owning single families that ride a hot market. There are a couple of cons of single family properties. The first is if you're looking to grow a massive rental portfolio and create a lot of wealth, it's harder to scale with single family rental properties. If you want to get 10 rental doors, you're gonna probably have to buy 10 individual single family rentals, and you're probably going to have to do that one at a time. So that will take a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of effort, especially if you're utilizing the BRRRR method where you got to buy them all, rehab them all, get them rented, refinance them all. So it's awesome, and there's a lot of pros to it, and I love single family rentals. I'll never not buy them, but it's a little bit harder to scale. Now, of course, you can say that you can buy packages, and I bought 42 houses at one time. I bought 27 houses at one time. I bought 11 houses at one time. So I've been able to buy packages of single family rental properties. However, they are much more rare than a multifamily. If you want to get 10 doors, buying a 10 unit multifamily is much easier than 10 single family one-offs. The only other con I see that is actually substantial and carries any weight is your assets are spread out. It's really nice, and I'll get into some of the pros of multifamily here shortly, but it's really nice to have your assets and everything in one area. So if you're gonna own those 10 single family rental properties that I talked about, they're probably going to be spread out. So there's some inefficiencies to having assets spread out. Now, you're probably gonna have them in the same general area, like, you know, zip codes or counties maybe, or within an hour, hopefully, of each other. I think you should for efficiency purposes. But having assets spread out makes it a little bit difficult. If you have 3 maintenance calls on your properties in a day and your property management company or you send out your maintenance techs or your maintenance crew or a contractor, that might take them all day because they got to drive, look, fix things, go to the store, go out to their truck, go to Home Depot, pick up some parts, fix it, go to the next property. So there's just a little bit more inefficiencies there. Again, not the end of the world. You can work around it. I know people, and myself included, that own properties spread out through an entire city. So it happens. And the beautiful thing about it is the more you buy, the more you get that are close to each other because they kind of fill in the map. So you do get some efficiencies if you eventually scale. But like I just said, it's a little bit harder to scale. All right, let's move on to multifamilies. Let's actually start out with the cons of multifamilies and then get into the pros, because I like both asset classes a ton, but there are a few more cons to owning multifamily, in my opinion, than single family. The first con to owning multifamily is they're a little bit harder to sell. Now, there are people out there that want to buy multifamilies, like I mentioned earlier, but definitely not near as many. Single families have every type of person and business and asset class, from JP Morgan down to somebody that just graduated college or high school is looking for their first house, looking to buy them. So that the actual demand is just ginormous. But on multifamilies, it's usually gonna be an investor. And honestly, there's not a ton of real estate investors that want to own multifamily properties if we're talking about the entire population and the percentage. I don't know what that percentage is, but not that many people invest in real estate. Of course, you hopefully know some people, but if you're talking about the whole population, not very many people invest in real estate. And a large chunk of those that do probably either invest in REITs maybe, or have one single family rental. They don't have multifamilies or don't want to because they're scared or just don't want to get in that space. So they are a little bit harder to sell. The second con is probably the biggest con for me when owning multifamily properties, and it's one bad apple can spoil an entire building. My biggest apartment complex is 32 units. So if I had one or two, and we've had this happen actually when we took over, one or two bad tenants can really just kind of not ruin a whole building or a whole complex, but it can really have a negative effect. If one tenant is partying or bringing friends around or dealing drugs out of the property, or, you know, just not taking care of the property, throwing cigarettes, letting their dog crap all over everything, that can spread. People don't want to live around that do care about themselves and their property and their upkeep. Those are the tenants that I want. And B, it kind of almost is infectious. They're like, well, if that person can let their dog just shit all over the common area without picking it up, I'm not going to pick it up because I just stepped in that dog shit, that kind of thing. So, you know, not everybody has that mindset, but some people do. Even a good tenant can kind of walk down that bad path if they see another tenant wrecking the place. So you can take care of this by approving good tenants and doing your best, but there always is that potential. So that's definitely something that makes it a little bit harder to manage than single families, because there's one single family tenant that's bad, the neighbors may complain, you can eventually get them out, or the neighbors won't complain because it's not a huge deal, but they're just only affecting that one property. The third con to owning multifamily is they're harder to finance. Somebody that wants a single family rental property, they can use especially if they're going to be house hacking or living in it, they can use a USDA loan, which is 0% down. They can use an FHA loan, 203K, that is 3.5% down, and there's even forgiveness programs for that. They can put 10% down, they can put 20% down, or they don't need to make a ton of money to get funding from hard money, private money, or a bank to own a single family rental property. They're pretty easy to fund, and now of course you have to have some of your ducks in a row, but they're pretty easy to fund. Multifamilies, that's not always the case. You're not gonna be able to do any of those routes I just talked about. You're probably gonna have to put 25% down in cash. Now you could use private lenders like I do, but then you have to convince a private lender to give you 25% or 20% and convince them that they're not gonna get their money back for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, maybe longer if you're doing an extended BRRRR deals like I do on my multifamily properties. And if you want to know what that looks like, check out this video up here where I walk you through one of my multifamily properties, how we found the deal and how we funded it. So it's not impossible, but it is harder to fund. And the bigger you get, the more properties there are, the more dollars it is, and naturally it's harder to come up with the funding and be approved for a $5 million purchase as opposed to a $100,000 purchase. All right, on to some pros, and honestly, the pros of multifamily are massive in my opinion. The first is, I hinted at it earlier with single families, but scalability. You can spend an entire year finding and funding and getting 2 multifamilies under contract. You can get a 16 unit and a 12 unit under contract. Those are the only transaction you do all year, but you just added 28 doors to your rental portfolio. That's not impossible, but it's damn near impossible to add 28 single family rental properties to your rental portfolio. Now you can do it with a package or one-offs, but that would be doing more than 2 buys and rehabs a month and then turning them quickly, buys, rehabs a month. You'd have probably 5 to 10 going on at a time. So that would be a lot to get up to 28 doors with single families in a year, but multis, it's really not that hard, especially if you have your funding lined up and your sourcing lined up. It wouldn't be that hard to do that in an entire year if you're willing to spend, maybe 5 hours a week working on that goal. Owning multifamily and the equity that creates is how most people create their massive wealth. Single families has just recently become an asset class that like BlackRock and hedge funds and JP Morgan and all these big companies are interested in because they see the power in them that we've known about for a long time. They're finally in the space, but multifamilies have always been a way that wealthy people grow their wealth or hide their wealth or store their wealth or create their wealth through multifamilies. The second pro of owning multifamilies, which is probably my favorite pro, maybe of all of them, is you have control over the value of your assets. You can ride the wave of single families like I mentioned earlier, but you also don't have any control if the market is crashing or tanking or dipping. The value of your single families is based on the value of the properties around it. And if the economy or real estate market is dipping, then naturally your asset single family is going to follow that dip. That's not really the case, or not nearly as drastic of the case in multifamilies. Multifamily properties are based on the net income that they produce. They're not based on comparable sales of other multifamilies in the area. Of course, banks and funding sources are going to look at those, but the actual value and the value that they're going to put on paper at the bank or when you sell it is based on the income it produces. It's called the cap rate. I don't really want to get into that right now. It's not super complicated, but I do have a video up here that talks about the cap rate. And the cap rate is just a valuation for multifamilies based on how much income it produces. You take the net income of the property and how much it produces minus the mortgage, minus your debt payment on it. And you take that and you multiply that by a certain percentage, and that's your value. And guess what? You control that income because you control the rent you collect. Every single multifamily that we have bought, we've bought that rents are substantially below market rate. So we make the building nice, we fix it up, and when tenants move out or on lease ups, we raise the rent. We always do it in a very tactical way. We're not gonna bump somebody up from $800 a month to $1,200 a month. We'll slowly raise the rent, but if a tenant moves out and we fix up the unit a little bit, we will go from that $800 to $1,200. And raising rent, even $50, $100, $200, $300 a month on scale over 10, 20, or 32 units like my apartment complex adds massive value because you're increasing that net income. But you also have a say in the expenses. We take better care of our tenants than any landlord we buy them from, but we're efficient with our expenses. We allow tenants to pay online. We have systems and processes and technologies we use that cut down in expenses. So when we buy a multifamily property, we're buying it at a discount and we're buying it knowing that we're gonna raise rents the right way over time, and then we're gonna get expenses down, and that increase in net incomes adds massive, massive value. Like my 32 unit, I bought it in 2018. I bought it for 1.1 million. And there was kind of a lot of things we did and used cash flow, but we increased the net income. And last year, the year before, it appraised for 2 million. So we literally almost doubled the value in like 4 years because we were able to increase the net income by doing things and getting creative. You can't probably double the value of a single family property just by raising the rent. It's based on the actual assets around it, like I mentioned earlier. In recap, buy real estate, buy assets, hold them over a long period of time, and wealth will be created for you. You can creatively do that without using any of your own money like I do, or you can put 20% down and fund it that way. I prefer the no money route, but whatever you want to do, whichever route you want to go down, just go down that route. Start buying assets now. With technology and hedge funds buying real estate and all the craziness happening in the world, there is not much better you can do than own real estate in the US. So buy real estate, hold on to it, you'll be happy you did. If you want a walkthrough of how to do that, check out this video over here where I walk through a single family rental property, show you how to buy it, fix it up, rent it, refinance it with none of your own money. See you on the next one.